Look, if you follow politics today, it is so easy to just get lost in the noise, right? We're constantly bombarded with these loud, messy public fights, especially whenever a new insurgent movement pops up to challenge the political establishment. But what if I told you the real story actually isn't that loud public rejection at all? What if the most effective way political institutions neutralize threats is through this quiet, almost invisible process of absorption? Well, in this explainer, we're going to break down a really fascinating piece of analysis called the containment strategy. It literally pulls back the curtain on how the American two-party system digests and neutralizes radical energy without actually changing a single fundamental thing about how power operates. Here is our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at the two kinds of resistance, then the anatomy of absorption, followed by institutional emergent behavior. After that, we'll trace the history of this strategy and wrap up with how movements actually build durable power.
All right, part 1. Two kinds of resistance.
Okay, let's dive into this. When established political parties react to insurgent left-wing movements, like, say, the Democratic Socialists of America winning elections or primarying incumbents, you basically see two reactions. The first one, the hissy fit. This is that loud, visible resistance we just talked about. The open fights, the frantic op-eds warning the party is being captured, heavy-handed pushback from commentators. And because it's so loud, it's what we all naturally pay attention to. But the second reaction is way more consequential. Quiet containment. Politically savvy leaders, they don't fight the new energy, they embrace it. They compliment the organizers, they adopt their slogans, and they might even hire them for staff jobs. To really get why they do this, just look at this number. There are roughly 120,000 DSA members right now, which reflects this massive surge following recent insurgent campaigns, like the Mamdani slate in New York. Now, put yourself in the shoes of a smart establishment politician. You look at that and realize, yeah, going to war with 120,000 highly motivated people, that is a terrible strategy. The goal for the establishment isn't to fight that energy. The goal is to metabolize it.
Which brings us to Section 2, the anatomy of absorption.
This whole thing works almost exactly like a biological process, a sort of digestion. Step 1, the party extracts the useful nutrients. They take the vocabulary and maybe the most popular 20% of the insurgents' program. Step 2, they scoop up the most talented young organizers from that movement and give them committee assignments, staff jobs. They offer them a real path. But then the catch. Step 3, in exchange for being included, the party requires that the real systemic demands be quietly dropped. So the party absorbs the energy, but absolutely retains the ultimate authority. And this brilliantly illustrates the critical difference between what gets kept and what gets tossed out. The establishment will happily absorb a message like cost of living or affordability. And why is that? Well, because it has broad appeal. Literally everyone loves affordability. It is politically bulletproof. But what about strict rent control or structurally taxing asset holders? Yeah. Suddenly, the establishment gets real quiet, because those demands actually have an identifiable loser. They threaten very specific power structures. So you keep the safe word, affordability, but you drop the dangerous class analysis of why things are unaffordable in the first place.
Moving on to Section 3, institutional emergent behavior. Now, it is so easy to picture a bunch of cartoon villains sitting around in a smoke-filled room orchestrating this entire playbook. But the reality? It's emergent behavior. The containment strategy is not a conspiracy, and it doesn't even need a conscious mastermind planning it all out. It's just structures and incentives. Donors have preferences, which dictates funding. Consultants have a literal financial interest in pushing moderation. The media relies on a stable list of standard contacts. Committee assignments naturally enforce discipline. You just drop an insurgent into this congressional machine, let those natural incentives run for 4 years, and the system organically converts all that revolutionary energy into safe constituent services and, symbolic messaging votes. And honestly, here is what makes it so incredibly insidious. If you're the insurgent experiencing this from the inside, it doesn't feel like a defeat. It feels like you're being taken seriously. It feels like winning. You got the big meeting with the leadership, right? You got your slogan written into the official party platform. You got a hearing scheduled. All of that feels like a massive victory. But structurally speaking, that is exactly what absorption looks like.
Let's look at the receipts in Section 4, History of the Strategy.
If we trace this chronologically, we see this exact pattern repeat time and time again. Back in the 1930s, enormous pressure from the left produced the New Deal. And to be clear, those were real material concessions that improved millions of lives. But fundamentally, it was a settlement meant to stabilize American capitalism. It was famously built on excluding black agricultural and domestic workers just to keep the Southern voting bloc happy. The underlying structure of ownership completely untouched. Fast forward to 1972. After the insurgent anti-war left mobilized, the party enacted the McGovern reforms to open things up. But without any mechanism to actually sustain those movements, the reforms were rolled back pretty fast, and the structural logic of the party just changed out the people who went in. And now today, in the 2020s, the modern insurgent wave is crashing into this exact same, inescapable containment playbook. If you want a smoking gun proving that this is a recognized structural reality, just listen to this quote from Gary Hart. He was the strategist for that 1972 McGovern campaign. He openly described their approach as a left-center strategy, designed specifically to co-opt the left while staying acceptable to the center. This isn't some cynical outside critique we're projecting onto them. This is the operative's own word for the plan. It is just objective political mechanics at work.
Finally, Section 5, Building Durable Power.
So what do insurgents do? The structural asymmetry here is severe. Insurgents face a totally grueling path. If they manage to win an office, well, they have to keep it. They are constantly fundraising, trying to survive redistricting, holding together these fragile coalitions, all while trying to avoid blowing up the caucus. The party machine? It doesn't face any of those constraints. It's got more money, it's got institutional memory, and crucially, it has time. The party machine does not need any particular insurgent. It can literally just wait them out until they're either worn down or neatly folded into the establishment.
And we can actually see the effects of this electoral pressure almost immediately. The source text points out a really specific anecdote about Daria-Liza Avila Chevalier, a recently elected progressive. Reportedly, her own initial priorities list didn't even include climate action. Now, the author isn't framing this as a harsh accusation or anything, but rather as an early vital data point. Substantive, difficult issues quietly just fall off the list under immense electoral pressure, sometimes before a candidate is even officially sworn in. I mean, think about your own local elections for a second. How often does a really ambitious, radical platform quietly morph into generic talking points by swearing-in day?
So the crucial point is this. Treating electoral wins as the only scoreboard is exactly how a movement gets contained. To survive being structurally metabolized, you need a survival toolkit that actually builds durable power. What does that look like? Well, it means building organizations and infrastructure totally independent of any elected official. It means focusing on union density and strike capacity, because a solid union contract doesn't have to be re-won every 2-year election cycle. It means governing on legible material outcomes, stuff like effectively clearing the snow off the sidewalks, because actual delivery can't be rhetorically absorbed. You either plowed the snow or you didn't. It also requires keeping the actual capacity to say no to your own side, because a voting bloc that always votes yes has zero leverage. And finally, it requires picking fights that have identifiable losers, making hard demands that simply cannot be absorbed into a catchy, harmless slogan.
The fight over whether insurgent movements get a seat at the table, that's largely over. They've arrived. But the real fight is just beginning. What does a movement actually have to become in order to keep that seat? There is this profound, often invisible difference between winning true concessions and simply being purchased by them. Because, as we've seen, the true cost of political power isn't measured on election night. It's measured 3 years later, in what you are no longer able to say and who you are no longer willing to fight.